In a quiet town surrounded by endless fields, a young man named Ethan faces a legacy weighed down by debt, betrayal, and loss. Alone and under pressure, he must find the courage to revive his family farm against powerful forces determined to take it away. This is a story of hope, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between a community and the land they call home. Join us as we follow Ethan's journey to rebuild not just a farm, but a future. There was a chill in the morning air when Ethan Miller stepped across the creaking porch of his father's old farmhouse. The wooden floor groaned under his boots, as if protesting the weight of memories now resting on his shoulders. His father had died just weeks ago, leaving behind a land scarred by drought, debt, and silence. Yet, here stood Ethan, only 25, facing the wild unknown of trying to rebuild a dream long forgotten. The rising sun painted the sky with soft golds, but inside him, only shadows danced. He ran his hand along the worn wooden table in the kitchen, imagining his father's hands doing the same not long ago. This was no longer just a house or a field, it was the last thread connecting him to something bigger, something rooted in generations. But the fields outside were dry, the animals thin, and the bills stacked like bricks on a crumbling wall. Alone, underqualified, and nearly broke, Ethan knew the odds were stacked. Still, he whispered to himself, "I won't let this place die." A phone call from his sister Sarah arrived like the first breeze after a storm. She was older, practical, a teacher in town, and always the voice of reason. "You don't have to do this alone," she said gently. "We'll find a way." But Ethan, stubborn like the soil he stood on, insisted on trying. He had something to prove, not just to others, but to the memory of the man who raised him. So, he began. At dawn, before the birds stirred, Ethan was already outside, checking fences, patching leaks, and coaxing life from the tired land. His hands ached, his back screamed, but the soil started to answer him little by little. There was something sacred in the rhythm of that work. Something ancient. As if the land had been waiting for him to speak its language again. One morning, as Ethan was fixing the hinges of the barn, an old pickup truck pulled into the driveway. Tom Reynolds stepped out, a longtime neighbor and seasoned farmer with a firm handshake and a weathered face. "Heard you're trying to bring this place back," Tom said, eyeing the barn. "Could use a few of my tools and maybe some advice." Ethan hesitated, unused to accepting help, but something in Tom's tone felt honest. He nodded slowly. "I'd appreciate that, sir." Tom became a quiet mentor in the background, offering more than just tools. He showed Ethan how to listen to the soil, how to rotate crops wisely, and how to stretch every dollar without cutting corners. The two worked side by side some days, barely speaking, bonded by the shared language of hard work. For the first time, Ethan felt like he wasn't just surviving, he was learning. The land was teaching him, and so was Tom. Then came Laura Bennett, who ran the local general store with a sharp mind and a kind heart. She remembered Ethan from when he was a boy chasing chickens down Main Street. Now, seeing him shoulder a legacy alone, she stepped in with quiet support. "You need supplies. Take what you need. Pay me when you can," she offered, sliding a notebook across the counter. It wasn't just credit. Laura was investing in hope, not just in a farm. Word of Ethan's effort spread through the town like wildfire after a dry season. Some brought hay, others offered time or knowledge. His sister Sarah visited every weekend, helping with books, balancing costs, and bringing homemade meals. What once felt like an isolated burden slowly turned into something else. A shared purpose. A community waking up to help one of its own plant roots again. By late spring, Ethan's fields began to show signs of life. Rows of green sprouted from the soil like quiet promises, each leaf a small victory. The barn was patched, the fences stood straight, and the animals had a healthy shine in their coats. Ethan started to believe again, not just in the land, but in himself. Every sunset brought a little more peace, a little more certainty that he was on the right path. But change never comes without challenge. News spread of a massive agricultural corporation, AgroCorp, moving into the region. They were buying up nearby farms, offering fast cash to those drowning in debt. Their presence was like a shadow creeping over the land. Ethan watched as friends and neighbors reluctantly signed away their properties. He could feel the pressure closing in, but something in his chest held firm. He wasn't ready to let go. Then came the letter, bold, official, and cold. AgroCorp offered to buy Ethan's farm outright, clear his debts, and even give him a job managing part of their new operation. It would be security, comfort, an escape from uncertainty. He held the paper in shaking hands, knowing the offer made sense on paper. But it felt like surrender. He placed the letter in a drawer, unopened again. That night, unable to sleep, Ethan pulled out an old box of his father's papers. Amid faded receipts and handwritten notes, he discovered something shocking: a legal file showing that a distant cousin, Richard Miller, had helped orchestrate some of the debts that crushed the farm. Worse still, Richard had been quietly working with AgroCorp to push families like theirs out. Ethan's jaw clenched. What had once been bad luck now smelled like betrayal. The next morning, Ethan drove into town with the documents clutched in his hand, anger simmering beneath his calm expression. He showed them to Sarah, who scanned the pages with growing disbelief. This wasn't just neglect. Richard set Dad up to fail, she said, her voice tight. They knew exposing this wouldn't be easy. AgroCorp had money, lawyers, and influence. But the truth had weight, and it deserved to be brought into the light. Ethan and Sarah met with Laura and Tom at the church hall later that week. They shared what they'd found, and the small group sat in stunned silence. Then, Laura stood up. "If they've done it to your family, they've done it to others too," she said. They decided to organize a town meeting, inviting local farmers, journalists, and anyone who would listen. It was risky, but silence would only tighten the noose. The meeting was packed. Farmers shared similar stories: mysterious loans, legal pressure, underhanded buyouts. The energy in the room shifted from despair to defiance. Sarah took the mic and spoke with a calm fire. "They count on our fear. But this land, this life, it's ours. We don't give up." The room erupted in applause. For the first time in a long while, hope felt louder than fear. Ethan knew the fight had just begun, but he wasn't alone anymore. The next days were a flurry of phone calls, interviews, petitions, and planning. The community rallied like a storm breaking over dry earth. Ethan felt it in every handshake, every voice raised beside his. The land had awakened something, not just crops, but courage. And once that seed was planted, there was no stopping it. Weeks turned into months, and the battle against AgroCorp grew fierce. Legal battles, media coverage, and community protests became part of Ethan's new reality. The fight tested his patience and resolve, but each setback only deepened his determination. In quiet moments, he found strength in the land that had endured storms far worse than any man-made threat. It was a stubborn heartbeat beneath his own. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Ethan stood on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon. The farm wasn't just surviving anymore, it was thriving. Crops waved in the breeze, animals grazed peacefully, and neighbors stopped by more often, offering smiles and shared stories. It was a reminder that hope, like the seasons, always returns in its own time. Despite the progress, Ethan couldn't shake the weight of betrayal by family. Richard's shadow loomed over the victory. Then, unexpectedly, Tom revealed a secret. Years ago, Richard had approached him with promises and threats, trying to buy loyalty. Tom had refused, choosing instead to protect the community. That revelation ignited a plan. If they could rally enough support, they could expose Richard fully, ending his influence once and for all. With renewed vigor, Ethan led the charge. They gathered evidence, recorded testimonies, and built a case stronger than any corporate lawyer could ignore. The town stood behind them, united and fierce. In that struggle, Ethan found not just the strength to save the farm, but a family forged through shared hardship and unwavering hope. The land and its people were one, and together, they were unstoppable. The day came when the court ruled in favor of the farmers. AgroCorp was forced to retract their offers and compensate those harmed by their schemes. Richard Miller's reputation crumbled, and he vanished from the town's life like a bad dream. Ethan stood in the crowd, watching neighbors cheer and hug, tears of relief and joy mixing in the spring breeze. The farm was finally free to grow, just as his father had dreamed. In the weeks that followed, Ethan and Sarah worked side by side to rebuild the farm stronger than ever. They planted orchards, repaired old machinery, and reopened the barn for community gatherings. The farm became a symbol of resilience, a place where history, family, and nature intertwined in harmony. Ethan felt a peace he hadn't known before, a quiet pride in carrying the legacy forward. One evening, As the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple, Ethan walked the fields, feeling the soil warm beneath his boots. He thought of his father, of the struggles, the betrayals, and the victories. Life was unpredictable and often hard, but it was also beautiful in its rawness. With the farm thriving and community strong, Ethan knew this was just the beginning of a new chapter. The land had taught him many lessons: courage, hope, and above all, that no one stands alone. As stars blinked awake in the darkening sky, Ethan smiled, ready for whatever came next. Because sometimes, the greatest harvest isn't just the crops, but the strength to keep planting. Thank you for joining Ethan's journey today. If you enjoyed this story of hope and resilience, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new tale. Your support helps keep these stories alive and growing. Until next time, keep planting seeds of courage in your own life.